welcome back to the Mom Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick, and my co-host is Chris Lucian. And very excited, looking forward to having a good time with Ben Holmes today. We have a lot of awesome topics to discuss: mob programming and onboarding, cross-discipline communication with designers and project managers, and how remote work in quarantine was a lot more bearable with mobbing. So a lot of good stuff here. But before we get started on the topics, Ben, can you give us an introduction to yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Ben Holmes. I'm a junior developer from Charleston, South Carolina. I've been doing this for, I guess, unofficially, like 4 or 5 years, doing a lot of web development stuff through college and some of high school. But I guess overall in like the corporate world, I'm pretty new to this. And just picked up what mob programming even was about a year ago. And I think our team's gone through a lot of sort of growth through trying it out in different scenarios. And I think we have a lot of stuff to share.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. And that's it's really great having a junior developer on the show. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And on that topic, how was, it sounds like you've had some experiences onboarding via mob programming as a junior developer. How was that?
Yeah, I would say it's like, I don't know, it was definitely the highlight of actually getting started with something because, I mean, I was in a pretty awkward situation where I basically went on a spring break for college that never ended to this day, pretty much. I didn't actually walk for graduation or anything like that. It's just kind of been going. And had to start work in June, just sort of sitting on my couch, going through sort of like the onboarding, being talked at and explained how everything's going to work, getting the IT permissions. And at least talking with other friends, I was kind of worried it would be sort of heads down. You're given your tasks every day because you're a junior developer. And then you just sort of work through them on your own time and have some forced coffee chats whenever they come up. But our team sort of decided, because they had started mob programming when they were in person through about January or February. They were just going to throw it on as hard as possible and just try to mob program all day, every day, and sort of just sort of like, I don't know, test what expression am I going for? Kick the tires, I guess, to see where it works best.
So you were, so not only were you onboarding while mob programming, but the team you were on was also experimenting with mobbing for the first time. Is that right?
Yeah, it was like, it was a pair programming process in the office. Okay. Everyone gathered around the same monitor. And this was definitely the first time we were trying to, use Google Hangouts and later Zoom to just screen share everything and ping back and forth. We were definitely new to the rotation style where we had a pretty aggressive, like 10-minute timer where each person would work on it for 10 minutes. And we try as hard as possible to let everyone guide us and not sort of type on our own volition, try to be sort of as dumb as possible and let other people weigh in. And it didn't really feel that natural at first, but it got there. But yeah, I think the main benefit of it for me was just because I'm new to sort of the tech stack that the team is using, and then also new to just working in a big code base in general. It's nice to have someone guiding you through the lay of the land. Because I mean, this is a huge monolithic React app. If anyone's a web developer, it's just all in React.js and TypeScript. And there's a lot of sort of, field knowledge that you're expected to have walking through it. That's just what ends up happening with React because it's so loose. There's not a real, here's where you're going to find this route. Here's where you're going to find this package or helper function or something. So if I was just working heads down on everything, I would probably be sort of pinging my, senior developer over Slack every once in a while and trying to get on calls. And I feel like I would be a nuisance at some point. I definitely was during, internships and things like that. I'm no stranger to sort of pinging someone over Slack and then looking over their shoulder, like, did they see it? Did they see that one? I don't think they did. I'm going to send it again. And then remotely, it's even weirder because you can't sort of look across the aisle and tap someone on the shoulder. So with all that being said, it was nice to have that pressure off and just have a room that you can always go into, ask the questions you need to ask, and be guided through the code base without having to sort of drive yourself.
Nice. I've been, I've kind of witnessed a number of junior developers kind of come into a mob and go over time. And one thing that I'm always fascinated by is this this idea of watching kind of the learning levels and contribution levels kind of switch. So kind of over the time in the mob, how did you feel the rate of learning, versus contribution happened? Were you contributing, slowly more and more over time, or was it different? What was the experience for you there?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depended on the tech stack that we were working with, because I'm pretty confident with React already. I'd been working with it for a few years, and they were just using Create React app under the hood. So there wasn't any new sort of weird framework to learn on top of it. So I felt like I was able to just get up and going right away. Any learning was just kind of field knowledge. Here's where you find things. Here's where the abstractions live, so you don't write something twice that you don't expect to. But then we were also working on sort of back-end microservice-y stuff, which I've never used in my life, and using the Kotlin programming language, which I've never used. So that was a lot of just learning on the job. And our team was new to the language as well. So it wasn't just, I guess, myself that had to learn everything. But yeah, I guess it was a lot of learning, working on the microservice stuff especially. But the big problem we had was just knowing when we should probably just take a break and read the docs on our own, because mob doc reading is it's not very conducive to like getting stuff done. And I mean, you can't, scroll through the page at the reading pace of everyone else. And you definitely feel pressured to like, we should stop reading the docs now and get back to what we were doing. And that just leads to more head banging, trying things out when you could have just looked it up. So that's definitely the hardest balance to strike with if you're trying to learn everything just through doing. Yeah, I guess that answers the question as well as I can.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I've heard that as a struggle with many different mobbing teams, is that like reading a document or a website is sometimes a struggle as a website as a mob. And I think the thing that I've seen relieve the pressure the most with that is freeing people up to use their own computer to research and be like, hey, I'll be out of the rotation for a little bit. I'm going to read this, but you guys can continue as a mob if you want and run experiments. And but I'll jump back in here once I finish reading this. And then so that works well for people who really want like full control over their doc reading. But some people are fine to read docs as a mob. So I guess find what works for your team, which is great. There was one thing I wanted to follow up on, which was that I found fascinating what you said, is that in a non-mobbing context, you felt like a nuisance to basically ask questions and learn. And then in mobbing, it at least felt better. And that's something I've heard before too. And maybe my follow-up question for you is, because I've been talking to some junior developers who are mobbing as well, and they still sometimes feel like a nuisance even in the mob. Have you experienced that, and how have you navigated that?
Yeah. Well, I guess I will say on like the nuisance points, like it's more internal than it really should be. It's like when I actually ask the question and get the answer, it's like, he really didn't mind me asking. I don't know why I was so worried. But yeah. I mean, the more you ask, the more it kind of feels awkward. But in the mob, I mean, I guess it's helped that we're a really small team that's rotating. I feel like if it was a mob of like 7 or 8 people, I would feel like I'm interjecting a lot. But because we're like 10 minutes per person, usually about 3 people together, sometimes 4, depending on availability. It usually gets back to me by the time I had those questions, and people can sort of drive me through it. So I'm fine sort of hanging on to it for a half hour if I need to, I guess. But yeah, I don't really feel like a nuisance at all asking questions during it, just because we know each other pretty well at this point. I guess we didn't as much in the beginning, but just because it's a smaller group, it definitely feels more approachable that way. But if you worked with mobs that are like, I don't know, a lot larger than just 4 people, is the dynamic kind of different?
Oh yeah, I think it shifts pretty significantly. You know, specifically the mob or mob of mobs, right? So
Mhm.
maybe the answer to that question is it varies. But I've been in a conference at a conference where 20 people in a room were mobbing on a quantum computer, a piece of code for a quantum computer, and that was a 20-person mob, and everybody was engaged, and the dynamic was very fluid, and a lot of people were researching at the same time to try and figure out, you know, how does the math work? How, you know, it's all very different. And then, you know, I guess in our professional environment, kind of outside of the conference setting, if you have too many people, one of our rules is essentially if you're not contributing and you're not learning, then go to a different mob. And so, you know, with 11 people kind of dedicated to a project, for example, then some people might have a 5-person mob and a 3-person mob and a pair, or and it can kind of equate out in different ways. And the size of the mob, I think typically the size of the mob follows the level of difficulty in the current stream of work. And so typically it's interesting, but, you know, people, you know, maybe from a management standpoint, people are like, oh, smaller mobs are better because they cost less. I think the exact opposite. I think that the bigger mobs are better because they're solving the harder problem. And so, you know, as long as they're engaged and or learning, then it's really important. So that's kind of my short take on that. But yeah.
So yeah, and I had one follow up on that because, and I think maybe it's more of a personality or social style type thing. But I've noticed that some juniors have trouble getting the courage to ask the question. It's probably in general, right? But even in a mob, they sometimes have the trouble getting the courage to ask the question or share an idea because they feel like they need to know everything, right? Like, oh, if I'm going to navigate this, I have to know that it's going to work, right? And so one thing that I've seen really help with them that lately is basically the experiment language, right? Just to say like, hey, I don't know if this is going to work. And I use this all the time. And even as not a junior developer is like, hey, I have an experiment to run. Would you like to try it? You know, and that is less of like, oh, I need to know, so I need to prove it to my team that it's going to work, right? And that helps create the space where people can run experiments without. And it sounds like maybe you don't need that, but I just thought I would share because maybe some people will struggle with that. So.
Yeah, no, that's a huge point actually that we've definitely noticed, where it's like, I don't know, we have a problem ahead of us and it feels like we need to pick the right solution to move forward because it's one work stream. We may have 2 or 3 sort of competing ideas, and we don't want to step on any toes, but we need to move forward with one of them. And I think phrasing it as an experiment would probably be like, I don't know, a way to sort of mitigate that is like, we're not really solving it. We're just trying something that we can't fully prove yet, but we might be able to prove it as we work through it together. And I definitely think that would help because there have been some times where I guess I just sort of silently leave the work stream, experiment with it on my own, and then come back if I'm like, I think this actually could work, and here's why. But it could be nicer to just sort of step up and say, let's experiment with it together, and just see how long it would take to sort of push through.
Yeah, and I think, and we've talked about it before, Chris, but I think it's also good for, so if you are onboarding someone junior, to not hide your mistakes. Basically, don't make mistakes on purpose, but it's to demonstrate that it's okay to have a failed experiment, right?
Yeah.
As a non-junior,
that was a piece of feedback that I received in the past. Was I would have a tendency to, you know, not necessarily hide my mistakes, but just I iterate so frequently a lot of the time that my mistakes just kind of become invisible because I'm making so many mistakes so often, right? And so I received the feedback from one person that I should make big mistakes in front of people to make sure that they know it's okay to make mistakes and stuff. And so that was an interesting piece of feedback. And I kind of converted that a little bit to showing people how to make lots of small mistakes all the time. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. But yeah, so I think it's probably a good time to move on to our next topic. And so, you know, The year 2020 has been kind of crazy for everybody, and especially related to the pandemic. And with the pandemic came quarantine, and that meant that so many of us software developers ended up kind of working from home all the time and shutting ourselves out from the rest of the world. So, how did mobbing affect you during the pandemic?
Yeah, it was definitely important for mental health, I would say. Um, it's I definitely was worried, like talking to other friends who are working at bigger companies again, like heads down, forced coffee chats, not strong team dynamic, where you sort of need those icebreakers to really get to know people. I do think that mobbing definitely helped just sort of meet new team members, because there were multiple people onboarding with myself as well on the team. And it made things just feel a lot less forced, I guess. And of course, I've definitely been stuck inside like most of the day. I try to escape outdoors when I can. But most of it is just, you need to have, I don't know, you need to be saying words to someone other than yourself or whoever you're living with at a given time. Because I actually expected to be up in New York, which would have been a much different dynamic and a lot of different, I don't know, places to go after work as well. So definitely keeping that sort of social energy alive was important. And we kind of had this problem as well, where it's like, I don't know, the company sort of offering mental health days or sort of extra break time on the holidays. And it's like, I guess I'm just going to sit around for a few more days, I guess. I don't really know where I'm going to go, who I'm going to talk to with that. So I feel like this is almost like a substitute where, I don't know, some people may complain about, I don't know, if you're mobbing on particularly large, like, I don't know, large tickets on a tight deadline, worrying about sort of if it would slow people down if you're not sort of swarming and spreading everyone out on multiple work streams. People worry about productivity with sort of the mob setup. But I guess the argument is like, I don't know, I feel like I don't need to take breaks as often because I'm sort of on and I'm typing and I'm coding, and then I'm off, sort of guiding other people and researching on my own. So it feels like there's more of a rhythm. I don't need to take as many just sort of hard stop breaks or Pomodoro timers or anything like that, just because the rhythm is a lot nicer. So I think it definitely helps with feeling less stressed, being able to just sort of keep working without feeling like you're running out of steam. And then also just the social aspect of getting to know people when you're new to a company and you might be starting your job remotely, which I know a lot of people are doing right now, and may continue doing in the years to come. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I do think social interaction is really important, as you know, especially during this time, and a lot of that is kind of facilitated through things like Zoom or Google Hangouts. You know, one thing that I had done is I had joined more online meetups or just meetups in general, both technical and non-technical, but I got exposed. You know, I think I've been more social in 2020 than I have been outside of 2020, which is a really bizarre thing to think about. And so, but you know, things like meetup.com and things are really great for finding people in common interest groups. And I know that, you know, people struggling with that concept, as soon as they joined one of those groups and started kind of talking about their hobbies online, I had seen a pretty significant shift in their mental state as well. So it's kind of a cool thing that you mentioned that, because I think, you know, with mobbing, I found that I personally, especially when I'm mobbing a lot, I personally do not have any lack of, I guess, social, you know, stress or anything along those lines. So I find it very interesting that you say that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I was trying to reflect on why mobbing kind of works so well for a lot of these things, and I think it's a couple of things, right? So I mean, it's the social, which is obvious, right? Because you're mobbing with multiple people, right? And so you kind of have that, hey, I'm interacting with people, I'm learning new ideas and things like that. But you're also creating something, right? So that's one of the really fun things about software development is you create something of value that other people use, right? And so it's time put to good use. It doesn't feel like, so to speak, selfish, right? Like, oh, I'm just having me time or whatever, right? And that you're doing something, right? Because I mean, I think a lot of meetup type remote things, it's kind of almost like this, like it's a chat and that's great, but it also misses that kind of like side by side, we're doing something together, right? And so I think and you also do have discussion while you're mobbing too. So it's a good mix of all those things. And I don't need to put down games, Chris, so you're gonna have to forgive me for this next statement, but so with video games, you kind of have that side by side element too, but you're not creating something, right? You're just having fun, right? But when you're mobbing, you're creating something, so it hits different endorphins, right? And so I think there's a lot of things that really help with that. And I guess I feel really fortunate to be mobbing compared to all the Zoom fatigue I hear about. So
I agree with you on the creativity and feedback. So some of the meetups that I join are creative in nature, and in that creativity, there's a lot of feedback on your creations, and then being able to kind of come back the next week and hear people either give you positive or negative feedback around those things, or constructive criticism is a good thing. But I think you get that all the time during mobbing. And so, for example, one person I recommended join an online woodworking group. And so you do the woodworking, and then you show it online, and then you get feedback, critiques, tips for improvement. And I think that kind of hits a little bit of the, it's not quite mobbing because you're not really creating together. It's not, building a Lego house at the same time with two different people, right? That mobbing is, but there are different levels of it. Yeah.
That's great. And maybe my follow-up question to you, Ben, on this topic is, so it helped in the initial, COVID swing of being alone. How has it been since then? Is it basically stayed, or you've had to run experiments to keep it, the benefits of mobbing and social interaction, or?
Yeah, I definitely think, at least since I actually wrote these topics for this meeting, our process has evolved. And we're not sure if we've landed on something that really feels comfortable. Because as I said, we started mob programming by just doing it all the time to sort of see where its strengths and where its weaknesses, so we can sort of back off from it. And it really depends on the week, but at least these past few weeks, it's been a lot of just, bug reports and very scattered work streams where it's like, mobbing really shines when we're sort of building these sort of subtasks that build on each other and eventually lead to sort of the finished feature, where it feels like we don't even have to sort of groom or plan the engineering tasks up front. We can just kind of get together on this one task, and then it'll lead into the subtask we need for the next one and the next one. So it feels like just one big continuous goal. But just with the way things have been going, it's been a lot more of like, admittedly, heads down work, although we still stay in the same Zoom room, so we can sort of unmute ourselves and ask questions at least. But it's been a lot of swarming to just sort of get things done. A lot of bug tickets that are just kind of, it would take longer to work on it together just because it's about an hour worth of work here, an hour worth of work there. At least that's how we've sort of justified it or planned it out. And then we've sort of gone from there. But yeah, we definitely keep mobbing when it feels like there's a continuous goal we're working towards. And it also feels like on those weeks, there's less to discuss because we use the agile process. There's less to discuss in like team retros and things like that, retrospectives on like our team process, because we sort of get it all out while we're working in the mob together. Because we sort of see what's going on in real time and sort of back off, explain it, and sort of change how we're planning things or how we're just choosing the right solutions in person. And those weeks where we're swarming, working on things individually, a lot of the retro items are, I feel disconnected, or things like that. So it's like, maybe that is a hint that we've gone too far in the other direction now, because we've been trying to find that balance. But yeah, I think we're still working on everywhere that the mob like should be used, but we are leaning towards a more like hybrid approach, especially now that we have a teammate who is on a completely different time zone. He's actually working from, I think, 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. his time to kind of sort of line up with us. So it's been hard to get everyone together. It's been mostly pair programming instead of mobbing. And then a lot of sort of one-off tickets and then reconvening to sort of regroup.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, we've heard of other places experimenting with the kind of parallel programming you mentioned. We were all on the same call, but still maybe working individually for a while and things like that. So that's cool to hear about. All right, right on. Well, I guess we can transition to the last topic. So you had some things to share about cross-discipline communication with designers and PMs.
Yeah, yeah. It, I mean, that all sort of depends on the project that we're working on at a given time. I remember at least when I had written that, we were doing a lot of sort of rapid iteration on sort of the same feature, where we had to, well, we had a lot of product asks that we weren't really expecting, and it's agile, so you have to sort of regroup and then change your timeline in order to accommodate for that. So instead of having, I don't know, awkward conversations between a PM and us over Slack and then sort of reaching a consensus, we just sort of have the same mob. I didn't say this at the beginning, but we have the same mob that's pinned to our calendar with the name of our squad. And that's something that a lot of the squads tend to do. It's just all day events. It's the same Zoom room. It's basically like an office that you can always walk into and ask questions if you need to. And that's sort of where we sort everything out with our PMs as well as our designers. At least with our company's culture, it tends to be that the designer does a over-the-desk check before you merge anything that is visual or working on the front end. So we obviously don't have desks where she can sort of walk over and review everything in real time. So instead, we just ask the designer to come in. We scroll through it in real time. We don't have to like record a video of us scrolling through it and then ask a question about this thing that we highlighted in QuickTime or something. They just sort of walk through it with us, ask any questions we need to. And we've had a few sessions where we just iterate through it ourselves and sort of have the designer there while we tweak the CSS and the browser inspector and just walk through it. We haven't had any times where the designer actually gets involved in the mob. They're just sort of overseeing it and giving feedback while we switch off between developers. But we have had one session where we got our product manager to write some code with us just for his own interest. It was about 2 hours of getting set up to work and an hour of actual mobbing. But it was an interesting time. And it was sort of nice to have that dynamic where we're so used to switching off and working together that we can get someone else involved that's not technically a developer at all. We can just sort of guide them through the process. And thankfully, he had taken some web development classes in college, so it wasn't super rocky trying to explain syntax. But yeah, it felt pretty natural to do it that way because then sort of the manager of the product feels like they understand how the product works. It's not as complex that way. We haven't tried to do that a second time because it seemed like kind of a hard process to get going from the start. But yeah, most of the cross-discipline mobbing has been designers overseeing us and product managers getting their feature requests answered. So we don't have to schedule multiple meetings to realign ourselves on agile tasks and things like that.
Nice, right on. Yeah, I think we have pretty similar experiences where, you know, we'll work on the code that the designer can't see, right? And then we'll pull them in and be like, okay, this A or B, you know, it's almost like the eye exam test, right? Like we've kind of discovered what's feasible in the framework. Do you like A or B? And they'll be like, A/B, you know, and then we'll tinker with the code in front of them and then and they're like, okay. And then sometimes we land on it right then and there and like, okay, great, that's it. And then we like commit that code and it's done. And sometimes they'll be like, I'm really looking for like Z over here. And I don't think, and they'll be like, okay, we'll get back to you. We'll research and dig into the code and then we'll bring them back in. But I think what you said about where they just kind of join the room as if it was in person is key because, and it can still happen. I don't know if you still see it yourself where people have an idea and they start doing the async mode, right? Where they're like, oh, I have a UX idea. And then they email the designer, right? And then this email thread takes off. And you can just see as each email goes, the miscommunications happening, right? and sometimes it's not even work we're working on right now. And so I think the key of waiting until it's the moment where that person is needed, bring them into the mob, hash it out, and then be done. It's been such a beautiful pattern in my experience, as opposed to the async throwing documents and images around at each other. I don't know. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean that kind of speaks specifically to the efficiency paradox sort of thing, and making sure that the item can make it across the finish line. The work item can make it across the finish line as fast as possible, rather than trying to fully allocate each person. And so email is really kind of a curse in that regard, because email is a delay queue for individual resource efficiency over flow efficiency of a single work item. So that is especially important to pay attention to. And so everything, I agree with everything in that regard.
Yeah, that's, and one thing I want to ask a little bit more about, because I think maybe Chris had the experience. I don't know if I've ever had the experience where like a product manager or product owner type person has come and mobbed with you. Was that something they asked? They wanted to be a part of it?
Yeah. It was just sort of a question of, I have worked with web developers before. How hard would it be to spin up with this project? And then we sort of went with it. Yeah.
There was.
I don't know if we'll do it again.
Yeah, sometimes people just want to try it out and see what your day is like from day to day, just to understand more. I know our CEO ended up mobbing with us for a while, and so I think some of the people on the mob were a little stressed out, but I think it worked out really good. But in general, it's a really good empathy builder, I think, in general, because they see the problems that you're working on, the reason why, things that in their mind, I think a lot of people outside of software development in general have this like, well, why did that take so long, and why did this take so little time? And it
Right,
feels
exactly.
completely arbitrary to them why one thing takes longer than the other. And so, I think that, usually I feel that when somebody asks to be in the mob that's non-technical, they're really trying to gain an understanding. And until that point, I think they feel like they're grasping at straws a little bit. But it usually only takes like an hour or two. And I think that the empathy level just goes way up. It's like, oh, there's all this stuff, this person knew that, and that person knew that. And it's especially good when there's a complex dynamic between multiple people that, it's basically like, oh, if this person had to wait for a Slack message and that person had to wait for an email, then this very same task obviously would have taken 2 or 3 days to complete. And I think it all boils down a lot to just the visible observability of flow efficiency. And that's why like doing Kanban is really good for teams, but then outside the team, there's still a little bit of a lack of empathy. So mobbing with that person can be really powerful. So I like the story for sure.
Yeah, it definitely helps with our designer as well. There was, one time that we invited them in because it seemed like a simple request to them, where they just wanted this line break to appear here on desktop, but to appear here on mobile. And we're using the Contentful CMS, where you have to input everything into this box, and you can't have any custom characters or anything to denote like, here's where the line break's supposed to be. So, we were working through it for hours, and she thought, why isn't this done yet? So just sort of showing her tweaking the CSS is pretty easy to explain, like, here's why this line break can't happen here. What are some compromises that we can work on? And it seems so insignificant in the great scheme of things. Like, why can't everything just word wrap perfectly? But if you've ever dealt with like unorphaned characters or anything, it's a complex problem. So yeah, it was definitely helpful to just sort of tweak the CSS in front of the designer, explain here's how sort of the feasibility works. So in the future, we can sort of say, oh, we can't do that line break. And she'll say, all right, I get it. And then we can just sort of keep going.
Yeah. And I think you just inspired me for something my mob was working on today, which was similar to that, right? Where it's something that sounds simple, and they are, the person is on record requesting it to look a certain way, but maybe to bring in and be like, hey, you want to see how it's looking and see is there a compromise we can strike here instead of working on this more hours, So I think that's great. And one tip that maybe to try out, my guess is that you guys have been doing a Git handover type mobbing. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did have a script for this actually that would sort of automatically commit everything that you were working on, tell you that your time is up, and then allow you to push it for the next person. But it was so hard to maintain, we just don't use it anymore. It's all Git flow. So any suggestions you have are definitely welcome.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, there is a mob tool for Git handover that they've kind of written all that code and they maintain it. So we can put a link for that in the show notes. But also the reason why I brought it up was you can also use tools like AnyDesk or anything like that. So if you want to bring someone into the mob for temporarily, like a product owner, without them having to install the dev tools, it only takes, I think, like 5 minutes to download, install, and then you send a code, and then they are mobbing and interacting with your development environment. And so there's pros and cons to that, but I thought I'd just throw that out there for anybody who's looking to have someone join without having them to install 50 things. So join a mob. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's so we know people that use the technique that you use. It's actually very common. I think it's probably more common than what we do, but in our scenario, we typically are on AnyDesk, and then we just go into the machine, into a single machine. In many cases, either cloud or local, and all mob on the same machine. And yeah, that removes the setup piece for the person joining in. And so I think a good measurement of that sort of thing is like, how long does it take a new developer to get started mobbing or working on the product? And so I think for us, it's like 5 minutes or less. Like,
yeah, that would be worth trying out, because I mean, we've tried like VS Code live share, which I mean, well, first of all, we work on some Kotlin code. We have to use IntelliJ. We have no choice, so that kind of makes it fall apart. But it also kind of disconnects sometimes. It doesn't really fit the true spirit of the mob to work in a Google Doc style, because people want to type over other people. It's supposed to be one person driving at a given time. So yeah, it would definitely help our setup.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think it's fun to see all the mobbing tools and all the different experiments being run, because I think we're all striving for what it was in person. Like going back an organization or two was someone joined, and they joined the day one. They were contributing and learning instantly, because they just walked into the mob room, and then the domain knowledge was there, and they didn't need to set up their computer or anything, and they were just using the mob station. And so I think, yeah, I love all the experimentation to get remote to that world as soon as, in the best way. So okay, cool. Well, I think we're hitting our time box. Is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close?
Well, I've never actually plugged myself before on like an audio podcast, but I mean, you can find me anywhere under the tag B Holmes Dev, HOLMES DEV. I've actually written a Medium article on how mob programming was used at our company, so you can find me on Medium. And my website is bholmes.dev. Just started a blog over there, which I just put out yesterday, actually. So I'm pretty excited to get it out there. It took me way too long to get it working, because I decided to not use a traditional tech stack and messed around with animations for months. But I'm glad it's finally out there. So if you're interested at all in web development topics, that's where you can find me. Web, Twitter, Medium, all those places.
All right, we'll put links in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well, we'd love your feedback. We love seeing it on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and all the places. So we just love the interaction from the community and your ideas and, criticisms and everything. It's all been fantastic feedback. So we love hearing it. And please like and subscribe and share with anybody who maybe is looking to help their onboarding process, or bring new people onto the team, or build empathy with designers and other people. And maybe mobbing might be something to try out. It might help. And so please share with them. And until next time, mob well and have a good one, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.